The crisp, sterile air of the courtroom felt like a tomb, and Nathaniel Sterling was hammering the nails into his ex-wife's coffin. "Your Honor," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Claire was a wonderful hostess, a decorator, a glorified secretary. The idea that she contributed anything of substance to my company is frankly laughable. She couldn't balance a checkbook, let alone a corporate ledger." Laughter rippled through his side of the room. Humiliated and financially ruined, Claire Redding walked out with nothing but her daughter's hand in hers. But Nate made one fatal error. He mistook silence for weakness, and a broken heart for a broken mind. He never imagined that the glorified secretary he publicly shamed was about to orchestrate the most devastating corporate takedown his world had ever seen. The house on Belvedere Avenue was less a home and more a monument to success. It was a cold, architectural marvel of glass and white marble, a place where footprints seemed to vanish from the polished floors the moment they were made. For 12 years it had been Claire Redding's world, a gilded cage she had meticulously decorated and managed, ensuring it was always the perfect backdrop for her husband, the celebrated tech CEO Nathaniel "Nate" Sterling. Their last evening together was a masterclass in passive aggression. Nate stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation at his feet. He hadn't looked at her, not really, in months. He saw through her, his gaze fixed on a future she was clearly not a part of. The catering for the Bainbridge event was subpar. He said, his voice as sterile as their kitchen. "The canapes were dry. It reflects poorly on me, Claire." Claire's fingers tightened around the tablet in her lap. It wasn't her tablet, it was a company device. She was reviewing the quarterly logistics reports for Sterling Innovations, cross-referencing shipping data with fuel cost fluctuations, a habit she'd formed in the early days when the company was just a dream sketched on napkins in their tiny apartment. She had designed the core algorithm for their flagship software, Nexus, a revolutionary program that optimized supply chains with terrifying efficiency. It was her brainchild, born from her MIT dissertation, but her name was nowhere on the patent. Her name was only on the marriage certificate. "I'll speak to the caterer, Nate," she replied, her voice even. "I thought the presentation was lovely." "Lovely doesn't secure a $10 million contract," he shot back, finally turning. His suit was immaculate, his face a chiseled mask of ambition. "Presentation is for wives. Results are for founders." The word wives hung in the air, weighted with dismissal. She was a category, a role, not a person. Not his partner. For years she had accepted this unspoken demotion. She told herself it was for the good of the company, for the stability of their family, for their daughter Lily. She had organized the parties where Nate charmed investors, she had proofread the proposals that secured funding, and she had quietly debugged the very code his expensive programmers couldn't fix, all while being introduced as the woman behind the man. But the echoes in the marble hall were growing louder. The silence between them had become a roaring chasm. He was staying out later. His phone was perpetually angled away from her, and the scent of an unfamiliar, cloying perfume clung to his clothes some nights. The signs were all there, a constellation of betrayal she had refused to read. "I've been looking at the projections for the European expansion," she began, trying to pivot back to solid ground, to the one thing they used to share. "There's a flaw in the carrier-to-depot routing. It's not accounting for the new EU labor directives. It could lead to massive overtime costs and potential union disputes." Nate waved a dismissive hand. "David Chen and his team are handling it. Don't worry your pretty little head about it." David Chen was a brilliant head of R&D, but he was new. He didn't know the soul of the code, its original architecture. Claire did. She had built the foundation. "Nate, he won't see it. It's a foundational issue. It needs to be rewritten from the source, not patched. I can show you—" "Enough," he snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. He walked over and stood before her, a titan in his own living room. "Claire, this is what I'm talking about. You're meddling. Your job is here." He gestured vaguely at the opulent room. "To make sure my life runs smoothly so I can run the company. You're not an engineer. You're my wife." He paused, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "For now." The last two words struck her with the force of a physical blow. The air left her lungs. So this was it. Not a fight, not a discussion, but a verdict delivered from on high. She looked down at the tablet, at the lines of code that were as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Her work, her mind, erased. The next morning, while their 10-year-old daughter Lily was at school, a courier delivered a thick manila envelope. Inside were the divorce papers. They were cold, clinical, and brutal. He was citing irreconcilable differences. The settlement offer was an insult, a pittance calculated to keep her quiet, based on the ironclad prenuptial agreement she had signed when she was 22 and hopelessly in love with a brilliant, charming man who promised her the world. A man who had, she now realized, been building his world on top of hers, brick by stolen brick. The prenup stated that all assets related to Sterling Innovations, including all intellectual property conceived during the marriage, belonged solely to Nathaniel Sterling. Her lawyer, a weary but competent woman named Evelyn Reed, had called it a financial guillotine. Claire sat on the edge of her perfectly made bed in her perfectly curated bedroom, the divorce papers spread out like a death sentence. She thought of Lily. She thought of the years she had poured into a company that legally didn't recognize her existence. The echoes in the marble hall were no longer just echoes. They were screams. Her screams. And as she stared at Nate's arrogant signature on the bottom line, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in the ruins of her heart. He had built his empire on her silence. He was about to discover the price of her voice. The Superior Court of California Department 4B was a theater, and Claire was the unwilling star of a tragedy. The room was paneled in dark, imposing wood that seemed to absorb all the light and hope from the space. On one side sat Nate, flanked by a team of 3 lawyers from the prestigious firm of Peterson, Finch and Associates. They looked like tailored sharks, smelling blood in the water. Nate himself was the picture of aggrieved success, his expression a carefully calibrated blend of sorrow and resolve, his dark blue suit radiating power. On the other side sat Claire and Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was a rock, her face impassive, her notes meticulously arranged. But Claire felt exposed to raw nerve endings under the cold fluorescent lights. Her simple gray dress, once a symbol of quiet elegance, now felt like a pauper's rags. The proceedings were a brutal formality. Evelyn had warned her that challenging the prenup was a Sisyphean task. It was airtight. Still, they had to try. Their argument was one of unconscionable contribution, that Claire's intellectual labor had been so integral to the company's formation and success that the prenup should be rendered void. "Mrs. Sterling," began Mr. Peterson, a man with a perpetually smug look, "you are claiming to have been a key architect of the Nexus software. Is that correct?" "It is," Claire said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I developed the foundational algorithm as part of my postgraduate work at MIT and adapted it to create the initial framework for the company." Peterson chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "An algorithm from a college paper. Mr. Sterling," he turned to Nate, "were you aware that your wife's homework was the basis for your $100 million company?" Nate leaned into the microphone. "Claire has a wonderfully creative mind, Your Honor. She was always coming up with little projects. I encouraged her, of course. But Sterling Innovations was built by a team of world-class paid engineers. It was built in a boardroom, not a university library." The lie was so bald, so audacious, that it stole Claire's breath. She remembered the nights they'd spent huddled over a single laptop in their cramped apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared dream. She remembered drawing the entire system architecture on a whiteboard that took up a whole wall of their living room. Evelyn Reed stood up. "Your Honor, we have evidence of Mrs. Redding's early work, including dated files and correspondence with her thesis advisor, Professor Albright, who can attest to the algorithm's direct applicability and originality." "Objection," Peterson snapped. "Relevance. What a student does in college has no bearing on a marital agreement signed years later. Is the prosecution suggesting Mr. Sterling coerced her, There is no evidence of that. Sustained, the judge said, his face a mask of judicial boredom. He'd seen this 100 times before. The powerful husband, the discarded wife. The paperwork was the only thing that mattered. The humiliation deepened with every exchange. They painted her as a hobbyist, a dilettante. They presented her contributions as whimsical suggestions, the kind a supportive spouse might offer over dinner. Nate's team produced employment records, payrolls, and contracts for dozens of engineers. They had receipts. All Claire had was the truth, and in this room the truth was an uncashed currency. The final crushing blow came when Nate himself took the stand to discuss the settlement. He was asked by his own lawyer why he felt the proposed alimony was fair. Nate sighed a performance of profound sadness. "Your Honor, I want nothing but the best for Claire. I truly do. But we must be realistic. The prenuptial agreement was designed to protect the company, the livelihood of over 500 employees, from this exact situation. Claire was never an employee. She never drew a salary. She was my wife." He paused, looking directly at Claire, his eyes cold and devoid of any shared history. "She managed our homes, she planned social events, she raised our beautiful daughter, and she did those things wonderfully. But she has no head for business. The idea that she contributed anything of technical substance to my company is frankly laughable." The word laughable echoed in the silent courtroom. It was a poisoned dart aimed with perfect precision. "To be blunt," Nate continued, leaning closer to the microphone, his voice dropping to a confidential, damning tone, "Claire couldn't balance a checkbook, let alone a corporate ledger. Giving her a significant stake in the company, or a settlement based on its value, would be like giving a child the keys to a fighter jet. It would be irresponsible. She is and has always been a brilliant homemaker. That is her skill set. The settlement reflects a generous severance for that role." His side of the room stirred with murmured agreement. Mr. Peterson nodded sagely. Claire felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. He wasn't just divorcing her, he was erasing her. He was rewriting their entire history, casting her as a helpless, financially illiterate dependent. A glorified secretary, a decorator, a hostess. The judge's ruling was swift. The prenup was upheld. The settlement was finalized. Claire was awarded the small condo she had inherited from her grandmother, a single lump sum that would barely last 2 years in the Bay Area, and modest child support for Lily. She would have no claim on the house, the stock options, or the company she had helped build. As the gavel fell, the sound reverberated through her bones. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, of a life being irrevocably fractured. Nate didn't even look at her as he left. He was already surrounded by his team, clapping him on the back, their victory complete. Claire sat frozen until the courtroom was nearly empty. Evelyn placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Claire." But something inside Claire wasn't sorry. It was burning. The shame was turning into a cold, diamond-hard fury. He had mocked her in a court of law. He had stripped her of her past and her dignity. He had called her a child with a checkbook. He thought he had won. He thought it was over. Walking out of that courthouse with the San Francisco fog chilling her skin, Claire made a silent vow. He had left her with nothing, which meant she had nothing left to lose. He thought she couldn't balance a corporate ledger. She was about to show him she could do more than balance one. She was about to buy it. The condo in Oakland was a world away from the glass palace on Belvedere Avenue. The air smelled of old wood dust and the faint, persistent aroma of curry from a neighboring apartment. The walls were a pale, institutional beige, and the windows looked out onto a brick wall and a tangle of fire escapes. This was where Claire had grown up, a place she hadn't seen in over a decade. It was her only remaining anchor, the sole asset Nate's legal team couldn't touch. For the first 2 weeks the place felt like a tomb. Boxes remained unpacked, monuments to a life hastily dismantled. Claire would sit on the worn floral sofa, the one her grandmother had loved, and just stare at the wall, the judge's words, and Nate's mocking laughter playing on a loop in her head. A glorified secretary. Couldn't balance a checkbook. Lily was her only reason for moving. Her daughter navigated the new reality with a child's resilient pragmatism. But Claire saw the cracks. She saw it in the way Lily's shoulders slumped when she mentioned her friends from her old exclusive private school. She heard it in the quiet questions about why Daddy didn't live with them anymore. One evening, while trying to coax Lily to eat a simple dinner of pasta and jarred sauce, a meal that would have been prepared by a personal chef just a month ago, Lily looked up, her eyes wide and serious. "Mommy, a boy at my new school said we're poor now. Are we?" Claire's fork clattered onto her plate. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. She forced a smile, the muscles in her face feeling stiff and unfamiliar. "No, sweetie, we're not poor. We're just starting over." "Is that why Daddy kept the big house?" Claire's carefully constructed composure threatened to shatter. She knelt down in front of her daughter, taking her small hands. "Your father's company needed him to stay there. It's complicated. But you and I, we're a team. And our team is going to be just fine, I promise." Lily seemed to accept this, but the conversation lit a fire under Claire's grief. A promise to her daughter was not a platitude, it was a sacred oath. She couldn't let Nate's version of her become their reality. She couldn't let Lily grow up believing her mother was helpless. That night after Lily was asleep, Claire finally tackled the boxes in the spare bedroom. It was a painful archaeology of her former life photo albums, forgotten gifts, her old college textbooks. In the bottom of a dusty box marked MIT, Archives. Her fingers brushed against a hard-bound black notebook. She pulled it out. The cover was worn, the pages filled with her neat, precise handwriting and complex diagrams. It was her dissertation. Project Ethelred Dynamic Logistical Frameworks for Non-Linear Supply Chains. Ethelred. She'd named it after an old Anglo-Saxon king nicknamed the Unready, a historical mistranslation of a word that actually meant ill-advised or poorly counseled. She'd always found it a poignant irony, a king whose greatest weakness was the bad advice he took from those around him. Flipping through the pages was like meeting a younger version of herself. A fiercely intelligent, ambitious woman who believed that elegant code could solve the world's messiest problems. The core of the Nexus software was all there, but there was more. So much more. There were chapters she had never shown Nate, modules she had deemed too theoretical or too expensive to implement at the time. There was a chapter on predictive analytics using AI modeling to anticipate supply chain disruptions before they happened. Another on integrating blockchain for unimpeachable transparency in shipping manifests. It was Nexus 2.0. No, it was Nexus 3.0. She had given Nate the engine, but she had kept the blueprints for the starship. A wave of adrenaline, the first she had felt in years that wasn't born of fear or anger, washed over her. The embers of her old self, buried under years of being Mrs. Sterling, began to glow. He thought she was a homemaker. He'd forgotten she was a builder. She spent the next 3 days in a caffeine-fueled haze. She turned the spare bedroom into a war room. She bought a large whiteboard and began sketching out a new architecture, an evolution of her original ideas incorporating a decade of new technology. She dug out her old laptop, wiped it clean, and began to code. The familiar cadence of the keyboard, the logical flow of functions and variables was like coming home. The muscle memory was there. The passion was there. She was rusty, but the mind was sharp. She worked late into the night, the glow of the monitor illuminating her face, the complexities of the code, a welcome refuge from the complexities of her life. She was no longer just Claire Redding, the scorned ex-wife. She was the architect of Ethelred. One evening, Lily came into the room rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, what are you doing?" Claire turned a real unforced smile on her face. She pointed to the lines of code scrolling down the screen. "I'm building something, sweetie. Something new." "Is it for Daddy's company?" The question was innocent, but it solidified Claire's resolve. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This is for us." She knew that code alone wasn't enough. A brilliant idea without capital was just a dream. She needed money and she needed allies. There was only one person she could think of who had both the resources and the vision to understand what she was building, a man who had been a fleeting but significant presence in her past. A man who had once told her father, "Your daughter has a mind that sees around corners." Robert Maxwell, the notoriously shrewd semi-retired venture capitalist. He had been an early investor in her father's small engineering firm 20 years ago. He was old-school gruff and had a reputation for spotting diamonds in the rough and for eviscerating those who wasted his time. Finding his contact information was difficult but not impossible. She drafted an email, her hands trembling slightly. She kept it short, professional, and bold. Subject: Ethelred. Mr. Maxwell. You don't know me well, but you knew my father, George Redding. My name is Claire Redding. I have developed a next-generation logistics platform that will make Sterling Innovations' current technology obsolete in under 18 months. I need 30 minutes of your time to show you why. Sincerely, Claire Redding. She hit send before she could lose her nerve. The apartment was still a place of ashes filled with the ghosts of a burned-down life. But in that spare room, on that whiteboard, and in the lines of code on her screen, a fire had been lit. An ember had caught, and it was ready to grow into an inferno. The response from Robert Maxwell's office came less than 24 hours later. It was a terse one-line email from his assistant, Mr. Maxwell's office, Thursday, 10 a.m. Be prepared. The Maxwell Capitol building was a sleek, imposing tower of black glass and steel in the heart of the financial district, a world Claire had only ever visited as Nate's plus one. As she walked into the lobby, her sensible heels clicking on the marble floor, she felt a pang of insecurity. Her blazer was from a department store, not a designer boutique. Her portfolio was a simple leather-bound folder, not a custom-made case. She took a deep breath, clutching the folder to her chest. Inside was her plan, her protocol for rising from the ashes. Robert Maxwell's office was on the top floor. It was surprisingly understated, filled with old books, nautical maps, and the faint smell of leather and cedar. The man himself sat behind a large mahogany desk, not looking up when she was shown in. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He gestured to the chair opposite him without a word, continuing to read a document. The silence stretched for a full minute, a calculated power play designed to unnerve her. Claire sat perfectly still, her back straight, her hands resting on the portfolio in her lap. She would not be intimidated. She had faced down Nate's contempt in open court. She could handle a grumpy billionaire's silence. Finally, he set the document aside and looked at her, his gaze sharp and appraising. "George Redding's daughter," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have your father's eyes. He was a good man. A terrible businessman, but a good man. You have 30 minutes. Your email was bold. Let's see if it was foolish." Claire slid the portfolio across the desk. "It wasn't foolish, Mr. Maxwell. It was an understatement." She began her presentation. There were no flashy graphics, no slick videos. There was only data logic and a quiet, unshakable confidence. She walked him through the fundamental flaws in Sterling Innovations' Nexus system, the inefficiencies she'd warned Nate about, the vulnerabilities to modern cyber attacks, the inability to adapt to fluctuating global trade policies. "Nexus is a powerful tool," she explained, "but it's a dinosaur. It's a static system in a dynamic world. It reacts to problems. Ethelred anticipates them." She then laid out her vision. She described the AI-driven predictive modeling, the blockchain integration for security, the modular, scalable architecture that could be customized for any industry from pharmaceuticals to aerospace. She wasn't just proposing a better product, she was proposing a paradigm shift. Maxwell listened, his expression unreadable. He asked sharp, incisive questions, testing her on market size, customer acquisition costs, burn rate, and scalability. He was probing for weaknesses, for any hint of the homemaker Nate had described. Claire met every question with a calm, well-researched answer. She hadn't just built the code. She had built the business plan around it. "This is all very impressive on paper," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But you're a ghost. You have no corporate footprint, no team, no track record. You're the ex-wife of a man who, by all public accounts, is a genius in this field. Nate Sterling is the face of modern logistics. You are. Who exactly?" The question was blunt but fair. "I am the person who designed the engine he's been driving," Claire said, her voice steady. "He put a flashy chassis on it and slapped his name on the hood, but the core technology was mine. And he's been running it into the ground because he never bothered to learn how it actually works. He's a salesman, Mr. Maxwell. I'm an architect." She pushed a final sheet of paper across the desk. It was a list of names. "This is a list of the top 7 engineers and developers who have left Sterling Innovations in the last 2 years. They left because Nate ignored their concerns, stifled their innovation, and prioritized marketing over engineering. They are the best in the business, and I believe they would come work for me." Maxwell studied the list. He knew some of the names. It was a list of rising stars. "And Sterling?" he asked. "What's your plan for him?" "My plan is to build a superior product and take his clients," Claire said simply. "But my proposal for you is more aggressive. It's what I call the Phoenix Protocol." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "Nate's arrogance is his greatest weakness. He has over-leveraged the company to fund his lifestyle and a series of vanity projects. His profit margins are thinning. The first major client loss or system failure will send his stock into a nosedive. When it does, your fund begins acquiring a controlling interest quietly and cheaply. We build Ethelred and secret launch it at the precise moment of his greatest vulnerability and trigger the collapse. I get my company back and you get a dominant market leader for pennies on the dollar." It was ruthless. It was predatory. It was brilliant. A slow smile spread across Robert Maxwell's face. It was the first glimmer of warmth she'd seen. "George's daughter." He mused, a newfound respect in his tone. "You don't just have his eyes. You have a killer instinct he never did." He stood up and extended his hand. "All right, Ms. Redding. You've got your backing. Let's go build a starship." The handshake was firm, a binding contract of steel and shared purpose. Ethelred Logistics was incorporated the following week. They leased a nondescript office space in a low-profile tech park in San Jose, far from the gleaming towers of San Francisco. Claire, armed with Maxwell's capital, began making calls. The first name on her list was David Chen, Nate's current head of R&D. She met him for coffee in a place where they wouldn't be seen. David, a quiet, brilliant man, looked tired and disillusioned. "He's running the place into the ground, Claire," David confessed after she laid out her plan. "He's all about flash about the next press release. We told him about the security vulnerabilities in Nexus months ago. He called our concerns unfounded pessimism. He's a liability." "Then come with me," Claire said. "We'll do it right. We'll build the system we were always meant to build." David didn't hesitate. "I'm in." He was the first domino to fall. 2 more engineers from her list followed within the week. Her team was small, but they were the best. They were the true believers who had been sidelined by Nate's ego. Working out of their bare-bones office, they began to build. The atmosphere was electric, a stark contrast to the stifling corporate culture at Sterling Innovations. Fueled by pizza coffee and a shared sense of righteous purpose, they worked with a feverish intensity. Claire was in her element, leading the team, coding alongside them, her mind sharper and more focused than ever. She wasn't just reclaiming her past. She was building a future on her own terms. The Phoenix Protocol was engaged. The siege was about to begin. For the next 6 months, Ethelred Logistics operated in the shadows. Their office was identified only by a suite number. Their digital footprint was non-existent. To the outside world, they were a ghost, a shell corporation in Robert Maxwell's vast portfolio. Inside, they were building a weapon. Claire was relentless. She was the first to arrive each morning and the last to leave, often sleeping on a small cot in her office. She managed every aspect of the project, from leading the core coding sprints to drafting the marketing strategy. The woman Nate had painted as a helpless dependent was now running a multi-million-dollar stealth startup, commanding the respect of a team of elite engineers who called her Chief. The work was exhilarating. They were not just improving on Nexus, they were creating something entirely new. David Chen and his team, unshackled from Nate's focus on superficial features, implemented the kind of deep structural innovations they had only dreamed of. They built the AI predictive engine, which they codenamed Cassandra. They integrated a tamper-proof blockchain ledger for cargo tracking codenamed Janus. The system was faster, more secure, and infinitely more intelligent than Nexus. Meanwhile, Claire's second front in the war was intelligence. David Chen still had friends inside Sterling Innovations, disgruntled employees tired of Nate's tyrannical and short-sighted leadership. They became Ethelred's eyes and ears. They fed Claire a steady stream of information, internal reports, client complaints, and details of Nate's increasingly erratic behavior. The picture that emerged was of an empire rotting from the head down. Nate, flush with the success of his victory in the divorce, had become even more arrogant. He'd purchased a new yacht, a private jet, and was frequently featured on gossip sites with a string of much younger women. He treated the company as his personal piggy bank. He ignored warnings from his finance department about cash flow and dismissed the concerns of his engineers. He was a king who believed his own publicity, completely unaware of the siege being laid at his gates. Claire's strategy was surgical. Armed with inside information about which Sterling clients were most dissatisfied, she and Robert Maxwell began a quiet campaign. They didn't approach these companies as Ethelred Logistics. Instead, Maxwell used his network arranging exploratory tech demos through a third-party consultancy firm. Their first target was North Star Pharmaceuticals, one of Sterling's biggest accounts. Claire had learned that a major shipment of temperature-sensitive vaccines had been compromised due to a Nexus routing error costing North Star millions. Nate had blamed the shipping company and offered a paltry discount on their next contract. Claire led the demo for North Star's executive board herself, introduced under a pseudonym. She didn't mention Sterling or Nexus once. She simply presented Ethelred's capabilities. When she got to the Cassandra module, she ran a simulation using the exact circumstances of North Star's failed vaccine shipment. On the screen, they watched as Cassandra predicted the potential for delay and refrigeration failure 72 hours in advance and automatically rerouted the shipment, saving the cargo. The room was silent. The chief logistics officer, a stern woman named Helen Vance, stared at the screen. "My God," she whispered. "How is this possible?" "It's not about reacting to data," Claire explained calmly. "It's about having a system intelligent enough to ask the right questions before a crisis occurs." By the end of the meeting, North Star was ready to sign a letter of intent contingent on Ethelred's official launch. They were the first major crack in Nate's fortress. 2 more disgruntled clients followed suit over the next few months, both lured away by secret demos of a technology that seemed like science fiction compared to what they were currently using. Nate remained blissfully ignorant. He saw the client meetings as standard contract renegotiations. His salespeople, bound by non-disclosure agreements, could only report that the clients were exploring other options. Nate, in his hubris, believed no other options existed that could compete with him. He dismissed the warnings as client negotiation tactics. "Let them look," he'd bellowed in a meeting, according to one of Claire's sources. "They'll come crawling back. We're the only game in town." The final piece of the trap was financial. While Claire built the company, Robert Maxwell's traders began their silent work. They used multiple shell corporations and intermediary funds to buy up Sterling Innovation stock. Nate's profligate spending had forced him to dilute his own holdings to raise capital, making the company vulnerable. Every time the stock dipped due to a missed earnings target or a rumor of client dissatisfaction, Maxwell's team was there, buying quietly, accumulating shares, like a python slowly coiling around its prey. They were careful never to acquire enough in any one name to trigger SEC reporting thresholds, keeping the true ownership fragmented and hidden. One crisp October afternoon, Claire stood before the whiteboard in their main conference room. It was covered in a complex flowchart, detailing Sterling Innovations' client roster, financial vulnerabilities, and stock ownership. Red lines indicated clients they had successfully poached. Blue lines showed the slow, steady accumulation of stock by Maxwell's funds. It looked like a battle map. The silent siege was nearly complete. All they needed was a catalyst, a public failure so spectacular that it would shatter the illusion of Nate's invincibility and send his stock price off a cliff. "It's the EU expansion," David Chen said, pointing to a box on the board. "It's the flaw you spotted over a year ago, Claire." Nate pushed it through without the foundational rewrite. "They're launching it next month. It's going to be a catastrophe. Union finds shipping delays. It will be chaos." Claire looked at the box. It was the very issue she had tried to warn Nate about that last night in their cold marble house. The problem he'd told her not to worry her pretty little head about. It was perfect. Nate wasn't just going to fail. He was going to fail because of the very problem his glorified secretary ex-wife had tried to solve for him. "That's it," Claire said, a cold glint in her eyes. "That's our moment. Get ready to launch Ethelred. The king is about to make his final disastrous move." The launch of Sterling Innovations' European network was accompanied by a massive self-congratulatory press campaign. Nate Sterling was everywhere on the cover of Wired, giving smug interviews on business news channels and hosting a lavish launch party in London that reportedly cost over $2 million. He declared it the dawn of a new era in global logistics, a testament to his company's relentless innovation. Back in San Jose, Claire and her team watched with a grim sense of anticipation. They knew it was the dawn of something else entirely. Their Ethelred platform was polished, tested, and ready. Their initial clients, North Star Pharmaceuticals and the others, were prepared to switch over the moment it went live. All they had to do was wait for the inevitable. It took less than a week. The first reports were trickles, not a flood. A few disgruntled posts on logistics forums about delayed shipments in Hamburg. An article in a German trade publication about unexpected labor disputes at a port in Rotterdam. Nate's PR team was quick to dismiss them as minor teething issues. But inside Sterling Innovations, it was panic. The flaw Claire had identified a year ago was not just a bug, it was a systemic cancer. The Nexus software, unable to properly process the complex EU labor rules and route scheduling, was creating phantom overtime, scheduling drivers for impossible shifts, and misrouting cargo through congested ports. Trucks were sitting idle, goods were perishing in warehouses, and penalties were mounting at an astronomical rate. It was the exact scenario she had predicted. The tipping point came 10 days after the launch. AeroCorp, a massive aerospace manufacturer and Sterling's flagship European client, had a time-sensitive shipment of turbine blades for a new jetliner stranded at the port of Antwerp. The delay was costing them over $1 million a day. Nate, personally flying to Brussels on his private jet to handle the situation, made a fatal error. He tried to bully and bribe his way through the problem, displaying a spectacular ignorance of European labor laws and port authority. He ended up in a shouting match with the port director, an incident that was promptly leaked to the press. That was the spark. The story went viral. Sterling Stranded began trending on social media. The narrative shifted overnight. Nate Sterling, the tech genius, was suddenly being portrayed as an arrogant American cowboy, incompetent and out of his depth. The next morning, AeroCorp publicly terminated its 8-figure contract with Sterling Innovations, citing catastrophic operational failures and a fundamental lack of reliability. The effect on the stock market was instantaneous and brutal. When the NASDAQ opened, Sterling Innovations SI stock plummeted. It dropped 20% in the first hour of trading. Analysts who had once sung Nate's praises were now calling for his resignation. Margin calls were being triggered for investors who had borrowed heavily against their SI shares, investors like Nate himself. This was the moment Claire had been waiting for, as SI stock was in freefall. Ethelred Logistics launched its website and issued its first press release. The timing was no accident. The release announced the launch of a revolutionary AI-driven logistics platform designed for the complexities of the 21st century global supply chain. It also announced their flagship clients North Star Pharmaceuticals and two other major companies formerly associated with Sterling Innovations. The message was clear and devastating. While the old king was fumbling, a new, more advanced heir had arrived to claim the throne. The market reacted instantly. Ethelred was the story of the day. Tech journalist Smelling Blood drew a direct and brutal comparison between the spectacular failure of Nexus in Europe and the seemingly miraculous capabilities of this new mysterious platform. Simultaneously, Robert Maxwell executed the final stage of the Phoenix Protocol. With the SI stock price at rock bottom, his network of shell corporations began to consolidate their holdings, transferring all their secretly acquired shares into a single newly created parent entity, the Ethelred Group. They also bought up the shares being panic sold, acquiring a massive number of voting rights for a fraction of their former cost. By the end of the day's trading, the SI stock had stabilized, but the landscape of its ownership had been irrevocably altered. Nate, having returned from Europe in disgrace, was in a state of full-blown panic. He was locked in his office, screaming at his board members, his brokers, his lawyers. He was facing financial ruin. He had personally guaranteed loans using his SI stock as collateral, and with the price collapse, he was ruined. He saw only the immediate crisis, the public humiliation, the client defections. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had been completely bought out from under him. Late that afternoon, an emergency board meeting was called for the following morning. The official reason was to address the European crisis. The unofficial reason everyone knew was to discuss Nate's future as CEO. Nate, ever the fighter, prepared to defend himself. He planned to fire his entire European executive team, blame them for the fiasco, and announce a recovery plan. He still believed he was in control. That evening, Claire went home at a reasonable hour for the first time in months. She cooked dinner for Lily, a proper meal, not takeout pizza. They ate at the small wooden table in their condo, the beige walls seeming less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. "I saw on the news that Daddy's company is in trouble," Lily said quietly, pushing a green bean around her plate. Claire reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Yes, it is," she said softly. "But sometimes things need to fall apart so that better things can be built." "Are you going to build something better, Mom?" A genuine triumphant smile lit up Claire's face. "I already have, sweetie. I already have." She knew that the final battle was yet to come. The boardroom confrontation the next morning would be the checkmate. Nate was a wounded, cornered animal, and he would be dangerous. But as she looked at the new life she had built from the ashes of the old one, she felt no fear. Only a cold, clear sense of justice about to be served. The Sterling Innovations boardroom was a stage set for a corporate execution. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members. It was the same room where Claire had once been praised for her flower arrangements at company dinners. Today she was coming for the company itself. Nate stood at the head of the table looking haggard. His suit was still expensive, but it seemed to hang on him his usual swagger replaced by a tense, defensive energy. He launched into a desperate blame-shifting speech. He fired his European VP via conference call in front of the board. He blamed unforeseeable market conditions and corporate sabotage. He presented a frantic, half-baked recovery plan. He was in the middle of promising a bold new direction when the double doors to the boardroom opened. Robert Maxwell entered first, his presence silencing the room. Behind him was his lawyer, and behind his lawyer was Claire. She was wearing a tailored navy blue suit, the color of power and confidence. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, professional style. She looked nothing like the broken woman who had wept in her car after the divorce hearing. Her expression was calm, her eyes sharp and focused. Nate stared at her, his face a mask of confusion and disbelief. "Claire? What the hell are you doing here? This is a closed board meeting. Security." "They work for me now, Nate," Claire said, her voice cutting through the tension. It was not loud, but it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Robert Maxwell placed a thick folder on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "as of 9:01 this morning, My holding company, the Ethelred Group, has acquired 51% of the voting shares of Sterling Innovations. As the new majority shareholder, we are exercising our right to restructure the board and management immediately. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Board members exchanged panicked glances. Nate's jaw went slack. He looked from Maxwell to Claire, the dawning horror appearing in his eyes. Ethelred, he stammered the name, finally clicking. That's your company. This is a joke. Do I look like I'm joking? Claire asked, taking a step forward. She walked calmly to the empty chair directly opposite him and sat down, placing her own portfolio on the table. You may remember I tried to warn you about the flaws in the European expansion plan. You told me not to worry my pretty little head about it. You did this, Nate whispered, gesturing wildly. The client defections, the stock crash. You planned this. You planned it, Claire corrected him, her voice like ice. You planned it when you chose ego over engineering. You planned it when you ignored the warnings from your own R&D team. You planned it when you leveraged this company's future to buy yourself another yacht. I just built the safety net to catch the pieces when you inevitably set the whole thing on fire. She turned her attention to the stunned board members. My name is Claire Redding. For those of you who don't know, I was the original architect of the Nexus software platform. For the last 6 months, I have been leading the team at Ethelred Logistics. We have developed a next-generation platform that is by every metric superior to your current failing product. We have also secured contracts with 3 of your largest former clients with letters of intent from several more. She slid a copy of her portfolio down the table. Contained within is our transition plan. Ethelred Logistics will be merging with Sterling Innovations. Our technology will become the new flagship product. Our leadership will be taking over. Nate finally found his voice, a raw shout of fury. You can't do this. This is my company. I built this. You built nothing. Claire snapped back, her composure finally cracking to reveal the steel beneath. You stole my work. You slapped your name on it, and you've spent the last decade coasting on a foundation you never even understood. You stood up in a courtroom and called me a child who couldn't balance a checkbook. Well, this adult just balanced your entire company onto her side of the ledger. The first order of business for the new board is a vote on the position of Chief Executive Officer. Robert, would you care to call the vote? It is the recommendation of the majority shareholder that Nathaniel Sterling be removed as CEO effective immediately, Maxwell stated formally. All in favor. Every hand in the room except for Nate's went up. The board members, whatever their loyalty to Nate might have been, were pragmatists. They chose the lifeboat over the sinking ship. And it is our further recommendation, Maxwell continued, a small, grim smile on his face, that Ms. Claire Redding be appointed as the new CEO. Nate looked around the table, his face pale with shock and betrayal. His empire had crumbled in less than 10 minutes. He stared at Claire, a torrent of emotions in his eyes. Rage, hatred, but also for the first time a sliver of terrified respect. He had mocked a glorified secretary, and she had returned as a queen orchestrating a checkmate he never saw coming. Get out, Claire said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Your personal effects will be couriered to you, defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken. Nate Sterling turned and walked out of the boardroom of the company that bore his name, leaving nothing but the ghost of his arrogance behind. Later that day, Claire stood in the CEO's office. It was Nate's office with its ostentatious furniture and panoramic views of the bay. She walked to the great glass window, the same kind of window he had stood before on their last night together. But the view was different from here. It wasn't a backdrop for his success. It was a horizon vast and full of promise. Her horizon. There was a soft knock on the door. It was her new assistant. Ma'am, your daughter is here. Lily ran in her face alight with wonder as she stared at the huge office. She ran to the window and stood beside her mother, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the twilight. Wow, Mommy, Lily breathed. You're really high up. Claire put an arm around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her close. "Yes, we are," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And we're never looking down again." The name on the door would change. The company would be rebuilt from the ground up, this time on a foundation of genuine innovation and integrity. It would be difficult, but Claire Redding was no stranger to difficult things. She had been erased, and she had written herself back into existence. She had lost everything, and in doing so had found the power to take it all. And so the woman who was publicly humiliated and dismissed as a mere accessory became the architect of her own incredible destiny. Claire's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the fire that can be forged in the crucible of injustice. It's a reminder that a person's worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, but by their own courage, intellect, and refusal to be broken. Many of us have felt underestimated or had our contributions ignored. Claire's journey from a silent partner to a victorious CEO shows us that the ultimate victory isn't just about winning, but about rewriting the entire game. If this story of strength and vindication resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph against all odds. Thank you for listening.
His ex-wife looked down on poor husband, never knowing he was a hidden millionaire in disguise. The dim glow of the hotel lobby's chandelier cast long shadows across the marble floor, illuminating the polished surfaces with a soft golden hue. Ethan Carter stood at his post near the entrance, his navy blue security uniform crisp but unassuming. His broad shoulders carried an air of quiet authority, yet his gaze often drifted, lost in thoughts, far removed from the polished grandeur surrounding him. At first glance, Ethan appeared to be like any other security guard, calm, composed, and discreet. But up close, the creases at the corners of his eyes hinted at a depth forged by years of struggle and sacrifice. His dark brown eyes, once bright with ambition, now bore a quiet intensity, as if shielding the remnants of dreams he no longer dared to pursue. The night shift was monotonous but predictable. Guests of the luxurious Madison Royale streamed in and out, their designer luggage rolling across the floor like whispers of wealth. Ethan watched them with detached interest, nodding politely when someone glanced his way. He knew these people well, not their names or their faces, but their type. The entitled gait, the rehearsed smiles, the subtle dismissiveness they wore like an invisible badge. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the lobby grew quieter. Ethan leaned slightly against the desk, his back stiff from standing. He allowed himself a moment to stretch, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension that had settled there. "Long night?" A soft voice broke the silence. Ethan turned his head and saw Tony, a young bellhop, grinning as he wheeled an empty luggage cart back to its station. Tony was new, barely 20, full of hope and naive optimism. Ethan offered him a small smile. "Same as always," Ethan replied, his voice low and even. "You get used to it." Tony chuckled, his boyish face lighting up. "Man, I don't know how you do it. All these rich folks walking around acting like we're invisible. Doesn't it get to you?" Ethan's smile didn't waver, but his grip tightened ever so slightly on the desk's edge. "Not anymore." As Tony walked away, Ethan's gaze returned to the revolving glass doors. The truth was, it did get to him once. There was a time when he might have been on the other side of those doors, walking in with his head held high, his mind buzzing with plans for the future. He had envisioned himself as one of them, successful, respected, untouchable. But life had a way of turning even the brightest dreams into dust. He remembered the day it all began to unravel. Isabel Harper, his ex-wife, had been the embodiment of ambition. Sharp-witted and beautiful, she had captivated him with her drive and confidence. Together, they had been unstoppable, or so he thought. Ethan had poured everything into his startup, working long hours and risking every dollar they had. Isabel had supported him at first, but when the business failed, so did their marriage. Her parting words haunted him still. I need someone who can keep up with me, Ethan, not someone who's stuck chasing dreams that don't pay the bills. The bitterness in her voice had cut deeper than he cared to admit. She hadn't just walked away, she had walked into the arms of Nathan Blake, a man whose wealth was as ostentatious as his ego. Isabel had traded their love for security, and Ethan had been left to pick up the pieces. The sound of laughter snapped Ethan out of his reverie. A group of young guests entered the lobby, their laughter echoing through the vast space. Ethan straightened his posture, his face a mask of professionalism. He nodded as they passed, their glances sliding over him without a second thought. Once they were gone, the quiet returned, and so did the memories. Ethan's life now was far removed from what it had been, but it was his choice to stay under the radar. He didn't need validation from people like Isabel or Nathan anymore. His success was his own, hidden behind layers of anonymity. A soft vibration in his pocket pulled him back to the present. Ethan retrieved his phone, glancing at the screen. It was a message from his personal assistant, a quick update on the progress of one of his companies. He read it quickly, his expression unreadable, before tucking the phone away. As the hours dragged on, Ethan found himself staring at his reflection in the glass doors. The man who looked back at him was a paradox, ordinary yet extraordinary, defeated yet triumphant. He had lost so much, but he had gained something far more valuable, the strength to endure. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the same routine. Yet beneath the surface of his quiet existence, a storm was brewing. Ethan Carter was no longer the man Isabel Harper had left behind. He was something far more dangerous, a man who had nothing to prove but everything to reveal. The next evening brought a steady hum of activity to the Madison Royale. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns moved through the lobby like a river of affluence, their chatter blending with the gentle melodies of the grand piano in the corner. Ethan Carter stood at his usual post, a silent observer in the midst of opulence. Tonight, however, the air carried a subtle tension, a weight that pressed on his chest the moment he saw her. Isabel Harper. She walked in with effortless grace, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Her golden hair, meticulously styled, shimmered under the chandelier's light. Draped in a crimson gown that hugged her figure, Isabel radiated the confidence of someone accustomed to admiration. Beside her was Nathan Blake, his tailored tuxedo and smug expression completing the image of a power couple. Ethan froze for a fraction of a second, his pulse quickening before he forced himself to stand straighter, his face unreadable. He had prepared himself for this moment, or so he thought. Yet seeing Isabel in the flesh, after years of carefully avoiding her world, sent a ripple through the walls he had built around himself. Isabel's laugh rang out as Nathan whispered something in her ear. It was a sound Ethan had once cherished, a melody he had clung to during long nights of planning their future. Now it felt foreign, distant, a reminder of a life he no longer belonged to. As they approached the front desk, Isabel's eyes swept the room with practiced precision. She was scanning for something or someone, and when her gaze landed on Ethan, she paused. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Isabel's expression shifted, the practiced smile faltering before being quickly replaced with a mask of polite indifference. She nudged Nathan subtly, drawing his attention to Ethan. Nathan smirked, the kind of smirk that sent an unspoken message. "I'm better than you." Ethan remained still, his face calm but his jaw tightening imperceptibly. He refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. "Is that," Isabel began, her voice barely above a whisper as she leaned toward Nathan, "the security guard?" Nathan finished for her, his tone laced with mockery. "I guess some people really do peak in high school." Isabel chuckled softly, though it lacked genuine humor. She turned her attention back to the receptionist, dismissing Ethan as though he were a piece of furniture in the room. But Ethan saw the flicker in her eyes, a hint of unease, as though his presence was an unwelcome reminder of something she had tried to forget. As they checked in, Ethan resumed his silent watch. The bitterness he expected to feel wasn't there, replaced instead by a strange sense of detachment. He had once built his world around Isabel, but now, seeing her with Nathan, she felt like a character from a story he had read long ago, familiar yet irrelevant. The couple moved toward the elevator, their luggage trailing behind them. As they passed Ethan, Nathan slowed down, his smirk widening. "Long time no see," Nathan said, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure Isabel heard. Ethan turned his head slightly, meeting Nathan's gaze. "Evening, sir," he replied, his tone neutral, professional. Nathan chuckled. "Still working the night shift, I see. Life has a funny way of sorting things out, doesn't it?" Ethan held his ground, his face unreadable. Isabel glanced at him, her expression unreadable but tinged with something Ethan couldn't quite place. Regret. Pity. He didn't care to decipher it. "Let's go, Nathan," Isabel said, her voice sharper than she intended. She pulled Nathan toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble as the doors closed behind them. Ethan exhaled slowly, his fists unclenching at his sides. The encounter had been brief, yet it left an aftertaste he couldn't shake. He reminded himself of the life he had built since Isabel had left, the success he had carved out of failure. Still, old wounds had a way of aching at the worst moments, and tonight was no exception. Hours passed, the lobby growing quieter as the evening wore on. Ethan's shift was nearly over when a soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Excuse me." He turned to see a woman standing a few feet away. She was petite, with wavy brown hair that framed a face both kind and curious. Her dress was understated, a simple navy blue that contrasted sharply with the extravagance of the guests around her. "I couldn't help but notice," she began, her voice hesitant but warm. "Are you okay?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "I'm fine, thank you." The woman smiled faintly, tilting her head as she studied him. "You don't look fine. You looked distant earlier, like you were somewhere else." Ethan hesitated, unsure how to respond. Few people ever noticed him, let alone cared to ask. "I was just thinking," he said finally, his voice careful. "About them?" she asked, nodding subtly toward the elevator. Ethan's brow furrowed. "You saw that?" It was hard to miss, she admitted, her tone apologetic. "They seemed difficult." Ethan almost laughed at her choice of words, but settled for a small smile. "You could say that." She extended a hand. "I'm Amelia Green, by the way. Journalist Ethan Carter," he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze steady. Amelia lingered for a moment, as if debating whether to say more. "Well, if you ever feel like talking about it, I'm a pretty good listener," she said, her smile widening before she turned to leave. Ethan watched her go, her figure disappearing into the quiet of the lobby. He didn't know why, but something about her words stayed with him long after she was gone. As Ethan finished his shift and stepped out into the cool night air, he glanced up at the towering building behind him. The lights of the Madison Royale sparkled against the dark sky, a beacon of wealth and power. For years he had let this place define him, its grandeur a constant reminder of what he had lost. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a shift. Isabel's return had stirred old wounds, but Amelia's kindness had sparked something else, a quiet reminder that his story wasn't finished yet. The next evening, Ethan found himself standing in the same spot at the Madison Royale, but the air around him felt heavier. Isabel's unexpected appearance had unearthed memories. He thought he had buried memories of their early days, when ambition and love had blinded him to the cracks forming in their relationship. He stood still, his body present, but his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The clinking of glasses and faint laughter from the hotel's ballroom echoed through the lobby. The charity gala was in full swing, its opulence an unspoken testament to the wealth gathered within. Ethan had no intention of entering the ballroom. His job was to ensure everything outside ran smoothly. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The elevator doors slid open, and Isabel stepped out, her gown sweeping elegantly across the floor. Her expression was guarded, her eyes scanning the lobby until they landed on Ethan. She hesitated, a flicker of something hesitation, Regret? Crossing her face before she straightened her posture and approached him. "Ethan," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and awkwardness. It wasn't the warm greeting of an old friend, nor the cold dismissal he had expected. It was something in between, a tone reserved for someone she wasn't sure how to place anymore. Ethan nodded, keeping his voice professional. "Miss Harper, how can I assist you?" Her lips tightened at the formal address. She wasn't used to being kept at a distance, least of all by him. "You don't need to be so formal," she said, her tone almost defensive. We've known each other for years." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his expression remained neutral. That was a long time ago. The words hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. Isabel's gaze faltered, and for a moment the carefully crafted facade she always wore cracked. "I didn't know you worked here," she said, as if searching for common ground. "It's surprising." Ethan allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Life is full of surprises. Before Isabel could respond, Nathan Blake emerged from the ballroom, his champagne glass half full and his smirk fully loaded. He approached with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. "There you are," Nathan said, slipping his arm around Isabel's waist. His gaze flicked to Ethan, and the smirk deepened. "I see you two have reconnected." Ethan met Nathan's gaze unflinching. "Just doing my job, sir." Nathan chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Still the same, aren't you, Carter? Always the hard worker." He glanced at Isabel. "Remember how he used to stay up all night tinkering with his little business ideas? Guess those didn't quite pan out, huh?" Isabel's face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort. "Nathan, that's enough," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But Nathan was undeterred. He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Here's to persistence, though. Not everyone can handle life's little setbacks with such grace." Ethan's fingers curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his composure. He had learned long ago that words, especially petty ones, only held power if he let them. "If there's nothing else, I'll let you get back to the gala," he said, his tone calm but firm. Nathan waved him off with a dismissive laugh. Of course. Don't let us keep you from whatever it is you do." As Nathan led Isabel back toward the ballroom, a familiar voice broke through Ethan's simmering frustration. "Do you always let people talk to you like that?" Ethan turned to see Amelia Green standing a few feet away, her arms crossed and an eyebrow raised. She wore the same understated elegance as the night before, but tonight there was a sharpness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "I didn't realize you were watching," Ethan said, his voice measured. Amelia stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble. "Hard not to. That guy is a walking cliché. Rich, arrogant, and entirely too pleased with himself." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "Sounds about right." "But you," Amelia tilted her head, studying him. "You didn't even flinch. That's not something most people can do. Are you always this calm under fire?" Ethan shrugged. "It's not worth the energy." Amelia narrowed her eyes, as if trying to see past the walls he had built around himself. "Or maybe you've just learned how to hide it. People like him don't get under your skin unless they've already been there before." Ethan's smile faded, and for a moment he considered brushing her off. But something about Amelia, her quiet persistence, her genuine curiosity, made him pause. "Let's just say we have history," he said finally, his voice tinged with weariness. Amelia didn't press further, but the look in her eyes told him she wasn't going to let this go so easily. The night dragged on, and as the gala reached its peak, the lobby grew quieter. Ethan stood by the entrance, his focus shifting between the revolving doors and the ballroom. He was about to call it another uneventful night when a commotion erupted near the ballroom doors. A guest, red-faced and clearly intoxicated, was shouting at one of the servers. The argument quickly escalated, drawing the attention of nearby guests. Ethan moved toward the scene, his stride purposeful but calm. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice firm but polite. The guest, A middle-aged man with a loosened tie and a drink in hand turned to him with a sneer. "Who the hell are you? This doesn't concern you." Ethan stepped between the man and the server, his presence alone enough to create a barrier. "I'm the security guard. It's my job to ensure everyone here feels safe." The man scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can tell me what to do? You're just enough." The word cut through the air like a blade, and it wasn't Ethan who had spoken. Isabel stepped forward, her expression cold and commanding. For a moment, the room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "This man is doing his job," she said, her voice steady, "and you're making a scene. If you can't behave, I suggest you leave." The guest stared at her, clearly taken aback, before muttering something under his breath and stumbling away. Ethan met Isabel's gaze, his expression unreadable. "Thank you." Isabel hesitated, then nodded. "You're welcome." But before either of them could say more, Nathan appeared, his face dark with irritation. "What's going on here?" "Nothing," Isabel said quickly. "It's handled." Nathan's eyes flicked to Ethan, and his jaw tightened. "We'll see about that." As Nathan led Isabel away, Ethan felt a knot of tension settle in his chest. The evening had taken a turn he hadn't anticipated, and for the first time in years he felt the past creeping back into his present. The gala had long ended, leaving the Madison Royale steeped in silence. The once bustling lobby now lay still, its polished marble floors reflecting the soft glow of dimmed chandeliers. Ethan Carter lingered at his post, though his shift had officially ended. The events of the night replayed in his mind, each moment sharpening the edges of emotions he had tried so hard to dull. The confrontation with Nathan, Isabel's unexpected intervention, and Amelia's sharp observations had left him unsettled. He stared at the revolving doors, their rhythmic motion a soothing distraction, as if he could anchor himself in their predictable cycle. Still here? The voice startled him out of his thoughts. Ethan turned to find Amelia Green standing a few feet away, her shoes in one hand and her small clutch in the other. Her hair had come loose from its earlier style, soft tendrils framing her face. She looked tired, but still carried that air of quiet determination that intrigued him. "Could say the same for you," Ethan replied, his voice low and even. Amelia shrugged, stepping closer. "I don't leave events until I have all the details I need." "Occupational hazard? Journalist thing?" "Exactly," she said with a small smile, settling into one of the leather chairs in the lobby. She gestured toward the empty chair across from her. "You look like you could use a break. Sit." Ethan hesitated but eventually obliged, lowering himself into the chair. He leaned back, his posture relaxed but his eyes cautious, studying her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken questions. Amelia broke it first. "I saw what happened earlier. With her," she said softly, her tone probing but not prying. "Who?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. Amelia raised an eyebrow. "The woman who couldn't quite decide if she was here to support you or tear you down." "Isabel, right." Ethan sighed, his gaze dropping to his hands. "It's complicated. It always is," Amelia replied. "But that guy she's with, Nathan, he's a piece of work." Ethan chuckled darkly. "That's one way to put it." Amelia tilted her head, her curiosity evident. "So, what's the story there, if you don't mind me asking?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of his past pressing down on him. But something about Amelia, the way she listened without judgment, the quiet patience in her gaze, made him feel safe enough to speak. "I met Isabel when we were both just starting out," Ethan began, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "She was ambitious, driven, and so sure of herself. It was intoxicating. We fell in love fast, got married even faster. Back then I thought we could take on the world together." Amelia nodded, her expression encouraging him to continue. "I had big dreams," Ethan continued. "I wanted to build something that would make a difference, a tech company that could change lives. Isabel supported me at first. She believed in me, or at least I thought she did." He paused, his jaw tightening as he relived the memories. When the business started to fail, everything changed. Investors pulled out, debts piled up, and I couldn't keep up. Isabel, she couldn't handle it. She wanted stability, security, things I couldn't give her at the time. So she left, and Nathan, he was already there, waiting in the wings. Amelia frowned, her eyes narrowing. She left you for him? Ethan nodded. He's everything I wasn't. Wealthy, established, connected. It wasn't a hard choice for her. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable, but there was no anger, only resignation. That must have been devastating, Amelia said softly. It was, Ethan admitted. But it taught me a lot about people, about myself. And now? Amelia asked, leaning forward slightly. How do you feel about her? About all of it? Ethan hesitated, his gaze distant. I don't know. Seeing her tonight, it stirred up things I thought I'd moved past. But I'm not the same man she left. I've built a life for myself, even if it's not the one she wanted. Amelia studied him for a moment before speaking. You know, it's funny. People like Isabel, people who chase stability and appearances, they often forget what really matters. And people like you don't. Ethan met her gaze, something shifting in his expression. What do you mean? Amelia smiled faintly. You've been through hell and back, and yet here you are, grounded, resilient. That's worth more than any amount of money or status. Her words struck a chord in Ethan, though he wasn't sure why. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time, genuine understanding. Before Ethan could respond, the quiet of the lobby was shattered by the sound of raised voices. Both he and Amelia turned toward the source, a heated argument near the hotel bar. One of the voices was unmistakable. Do you have any idea who I am? Nathan Blake's slurred tone carried through the air, dripping with entitlement. Ethan rose from his chair, his movements instinctive. Stay here, he told Amelia, his tone firm but calm. Amelia nodded, though her curiosity was evident. Ethan approached the scene with measured steps, his presence immediately drawing attention. Nathan was leaning over the bar, his face flushed with alcohol, while a young bartender stood frozen in place, clearly intimidated. Is there a problem here? Ethan asked, his voice steady. Nathan turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Ethan. Of course it's you, he sneered. The knight in shining armor. Ethan ignored the jab, his focus on de-escalating the situation. Why don't we step away from the bar and talk this out? Nathan scoffed, swaying slightly. Oh, you think you can tell me what to do? You're just a stop it, Nathan. The sharp voice cut through the tension like a knife. Isabel had appeared, her expression a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She grabbed Nathan's arm, pulling him away from the bar. Enough, she said through gritted teeth. You're making a scene. Nathan yanked his arm free, his eyes blazing. Don't tell me what to do, Isabel. You don't own me. Ethan watched the exchange, his jaw tightening. This was the man Isabel had chosen, a man who couldn't even control himself, let alone respect her. As Isabel led Nathan away, her gaze met Ethan's briefly. For a split second her expression softened, and he saw something he hadn't expected: regret. Ethan stood still, the weight of the moment settling over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. The past had a way of resurfacing, whether you were ready for it or not. In the distance, Amelia watched quietly, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She wasn't just observing Ethan, she was beginning to understand him, and in that understanding, a connection was beginning to form. The early hours of the morning at the Madison Royale brought a stillness that felt almost eerie. The grand lobby, which had been alive with chatter and motion just hours ago, now stood silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional echo of footsteps. Ethan Carter leaned against the front desk, staring out into the empty space, lost in thought. The incident at the bar replayed in his mind: Nathan's drunken arrogance, Isabel's sharp commands, and that fleeting look in her eyes when they had locked gazes. Regret. He didn't want to read into it, but the emotion was unmistakable. It clung to him, demanding his attention like a wound that refused to heal. Ethan shook his head, willing himself to focus. This was his world now, the simplicity of structure and routine, far removed from the chaotic ambition of his past. But no matter how much he tried to convince himself, the past was no longer content to stay buried. The sound of soft footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Ethan turned to see Amelia Green approaching, her heels dangling from one hand, her other hand clutching her small notebook. She looked tired but alert, her sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on him. "You're still here," she remarked, her voice a mix of curiosity and concern. Ethan offered a faint smile. "So are you." Amelia shrugged, setting her shoes down on the floor. Occupational hazard. Writers tend to linger where the stories are. "And what story are you chasing tonight?" Ethan asked, his tone light but guarded. Amelia leaned against the desk, her gaze steady. "You, mostly." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Me. You, Isabel." "Nathan, all of it," she said. "I don't mean to pry, but there's something about you, Ethan. Something that doesn't quite add up. A security guard who carries himself like he owns the place? Who doesn't flinch when a guy like Nathan Blake tries to humiliate him? That's not exactly ordinary." Ethan's expression remained neutral, but his posture stiffened slightly. "Maybe I'm just good at keeping my cool." "Or maybe you're good at keeping secrets," Amelia countered, her voice soft but probing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged, as if Amelia's words had pulled at a thread Ethan wasn't ready to unravel. Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning back against the desk. "You're persistent, aren't you?" "Comes with the job," Amelia said with a small smile, "but I'm not here to expose you if that's what you're worried about. I'm just curious." Ethan studied her, weighing his options. He had spent years hiding in plain sight, building a life that allowed him to escape the expectations and judgments of his past. But something about Amelia's presence felt different. She wasn't prying for gossip or leverage, she genuinely wanted to understand him. "All right," Ethan said finally, his voice low. "What do you want to know?" Amelia's eyes lit up with surprise and interest. "For starters, why do you stay here? A man like you, I get the sense you could be doing something else, something bigger." Ethan chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Maybe I've had enough of bigger. This job, it's simple, predictable. I don't have to prove anything to anyone." Amelia tilted her head. "But isn't that just running away?" Ethan's jaw tightened, her words hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. "Maybe it is," he said after a long pause. "But sometimes running is the only way to survive." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Ethan turned to see Isabel descending the grand staircase, her expression tense. Her gown had lost its earlier perfection, the hem slightly wrinkled, her hair no longer as pristine. She looked like someone who had spent the last few hours battling an inner storm. "Ethan," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Amelia glanced between them, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. She stepped back, giving them space, but staying close enough to observe. Ethan straightened, his professional demeanor sliding into place. "Is there something you need, Miss Harper?" Isabel flinched at the formality, but pressed on. I wanted to apologize. For Nathan, he was out of line." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Apology accepted." Isabel hesitated, her hands fidgeting at her sides. "That's not all." She stopped herself, glancing at Amelia as if noticing her for the first time. Amelia offered a polite smile. "Don't mind me. I'm just the nosy journalist." Isabel's eyes narrowed slightly, but she turned her attention back to Ethan. "I was going to say it's strange seeing you here, like this. Strange how—" Ethan asked, his tone calm but edged with curiosity. Isabel hesitated, searching for the right words. You seem different. Not just the job, but everything. It's like you've changed." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "People change, Isabel, especially when they're forced to start over." Her expression faltered, guilt flickering across her face. "I didn't mean to—" "You don't have to explain," Ethan interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "What's done is done." Before Isabel could respond, Nathan appeared at the top of the staircase, his face twisted with irritation. "Isabel!" he called, his tone impatient. "Are you coming or not?" Isabel stiffened, her hands clenching into fists. She glanced at Ethan one last time, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place: regret, longing, or perhaps something in between. "I should go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, watching as she turned and ascended the staircase. Nathan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his smug expression firmly back in place. As they disappeared from view, Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The encounter had reopened old wounds, but it had also given him clarity. Isabel was no longer the woman he had once loved, at least, not the version of her he had held onto in his memories. "You handled that well," Amelia said, stepping closer. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if that's the word I'd use." Amelia studied him, her expression thoughtful. "She regrets it, you know, leaving you." Ethan's lips curled into a faint, bittersweet smile. "Maybe, but regret doesn't change the past." "No," Amelia agreed, "but it can change the future, if you let it." Her words lingered in the air as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the lobby's tall windows. Ethan glanced at her, something shifting in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt the faint stirrings of hope, fragile but undeniable. The rising sun cast a warm glow across the Madison Royale, its golden rays streaming through the lobby's tall windows and illuminating the polished marble floor. Ethan Carter stood near the entrance, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, watching as the city outside began to stir awake. The calm of the early morning was deceptive, masking the storm that brewed within him. The events of the previous night lingered like smoke: Isabel's apology, Nathan's hostility, Amelia's probing questions. Each moment had chipped away at the careful walls Ethan had built, exposing vulnerabilities he had worked hard to bury. He told himself it didn't matter, that he could endure, but deep down he knew the cracks were widening. The soft click of heels against marble pulled Ethan from his thoughts. He turned to see Amelia Green approaching, a takeaway coffee cup in each hand and her ever-present notebook tucked under her arm. She was dressed casually, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, but her sharp gaze remained as focused as ever. "You're here early," Amelia remarked, handing him one of the cups. Ethan accepted it with a nod. "And you're still lingering. Don't you ever sleep?" She smiled. "Not when there's a story to chase." Ethan took a sip of the coffee, savoring the warmth. "And what story are you chasing this time?" Amelia leaned against the desk, her expression softening. "Yours." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, she added, "Don't worry, I'm not here to write an exposé. I just feel like there's more to you than you're letting on." He sighed, setting the cup down. "What makes you so sure?" Amelia's eyes searched his face, her voice gentle. "Because people don't carry themselves the way you do without a reason. The calm, the restraint, it's not just a personality trait, it's a defense mechanism. You've been through something, Ethan, something big, and I think it's still with you." Her words struck a nerve, and Ethan felt the familiar urge to retreat. But something about Amelia's sincerity kept him rooted in place. She wasn't prying for the sake of curiosity, she genuinely wanted to understand. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the coffee cup. "You're right," he said finally, his voice quiet. "There's more to my story, but it's not something I like to share." Amelia nodded, giving him the space to continue. "For years I poured everything into building a company, a tech startup that I believed could change the world. It was my passion, my purpose. And for a while, it felt like I was on top of the world. Investors were interested, the future looked bright, and I thought I had everything I needed to succeed." He paused, his jaw tightening. But then things started to fall apart. The funding dried up, the market shifted, and the pressure became unbearable. I tried to hold it together, but it wasn't enough. I lost everything: my company, my savings, and eventually my marriage. Amelia listened intently, her expression a mixture of empathy and curiosity. Isabel, she couldn't handle the failure. She needed stability, security, things I couldn't give her at the time. So she left, and Nathan, he was there to pick up the pieces. He offered her the life I couldn't, and she took it. The bitterness in his voice was faint but undeniable. "And now?" Amelia asked softly. "Where are you now?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I rebuilt, quietly behind the scenes. I started another company under a pseudonym, learned from my mistakes, and found success. But I kept it hidden. I didn't want to be part of that world anymore, the world that judged me for my failures and valued me only for my success. So I took this job. It's simple, honest. It lets me stay grounded." Amelia tilted her head, studying him. "But don't you think hiding is just another way of letting them win? The people who doubted you, who judged you, they're still controlling your life, even if you don't see it that way." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Her words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the elevator. Ethan turned to see Nathan Blake stumbling out, his face pale and his movements unsteady. Isabel followed close behind, her expression filled with frustration and concern. "Nathan, you need to stop," she said, her voice sharp but tinged with worry. "I don't need to do anything," Nathan slurred, his words barely coherent. "You're always telling me what to do, Isabel. You're no better than him." Ethan's stomach tightened at the mention, but he remained where he was, watching the scene unfold. "Nathan, please," Isabel pleaded, glancing around as other guests began to take notice. Nathan turned toward Ethan, his eyes narrowing. "And you," he spat, pointing a trembling finger, "you think you're so much better, don't you? Standing there all high and mighty like you're above it all." Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Nathan, I think you've had enough. Let's get you back upstairs." Nathan laughed bitterly. "Of course. Always the hero, aren't you, Carter? Always trying to save the day." Before anyone could react, Nathan lunged forward, his fists swinging wildly. Ethan sidestepped easily, grabbing Nathan's arm and twisting it behind his back with practiced precision. "Enough," Ethan said, his tone icy. "You're done." Nathan struggled briefly before slumping in defeat. Isabel stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Ethan released Nathan, his expression cold. "Take him upstairs, Isabel, and get him some help." She nodded, guiding Nathan back toward the elevator. But before the doors closed, she turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "You didn't deserve any of this," she whispered. Ethan didn't respond, the weight of her words settling heavily on his shoulders as the elevator doors slid shut. Amelia stepped beside him, her expression thoughtful. "Well, that was intense." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Welcome to my life." Amelia placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding. "You handled that well, but you don't have to keep carrying all of this alone, you know." Ethan glanced at her, something softening in his gaze. For the first time in years, he felt the faint stirrings of something he thought he had lost hope. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the lobby in golden light, Ethan realized that his story wasn't over yet. The past had shaped him, but it didn't have to define him. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding. The weight of the morning lingered as Ethan Carter stood in the Madison Royale lobby, watching the last guests of the gala check out. He had always considered himself adept at moving through life unnoticed, but now it felt impossible. The events of the previous night, the confrontation with Nathan, Isabel's whispered apology, and Amelia's unwavering presence clung to him like shadows, forcing him to face truths he had long avoided. The air in the lobby was quiet, but it carried a sense of anticipation, as if something unspoken hung just beyond reach. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his uniform, his movements slow and deliberate. For years he had lived a life defined by restraint, but now something within him was stirring. The sound of soft footsteps broke through the stillness. Ethan turned to see Amelia Green approaching, her expression a mix of curiosity and determination. She held her notebook tightly against her chest, as if bracing herself for what was to come. "Morning," she said, her voice calm but purposeful. Ethan nodded. "Morning." Amelia hesitated, then gestured toward one of the leather chairs by the window. "Do you have a minute? There's something I want to say." Ethan considered her for a moment, then nodded, following her to the chairs. The sunlight streaming through the windows cast a warm glow over the space, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. They sat across from each other, the silence between them charged with unspoken tension. Amelia leaned forward, her hands resting on her notebook. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me yesterday about your past, about Isabel, about why you've chosen this life." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And I think you're selling yourself short," Amelia said bluntly. "You've been hiding for so long that you've convinced yourself it's the only way to live. But it's not. You're capable of so much more, Ethan, I can see it." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't used to being seen not like this. Amelia's gaze was steady, unyielding, and it stirred something deep within him. "You don't know the whole story," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "Maybe not," Amelia admitted. "But I know enough. Enough to see that you're holding yourself back because you're afraid of what people might think, of what she might think." Ethan's jaw tightened, her words striking closer to the truth than he cared to admit. "It's not about fear," he said, though even as he spoke, he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. "Isn't it?" Amelia challenged. "You've built something incredible, Ethan. You've proven that you're not defined by your failures, and yet you're still letting them control you. Don't you think it's time to take back the narrative?" Ethan looked away, his gaze falling on the revolving doors. For years, he had told himself that staying in the background was a choice, a way to avoid the judgment and scrutiny that had once nearly destroyed him. But now, for the first time, he was beginning to question that narrative. Before Ethan could respond, the sound of raised voices drew their attention. Isabel Harper stood near the front desk, her expression tense as she spoke with Nathan Blake. His face was red, his gestures wild and erratic. It was clear that whatever composure he had left was quickly unraveling. Ethan rose instinctively, his years of training kicking in. Amelia followed close behind, her notebook forgotten as she watched the scene unfold. "Isabel," Nathan slurred, his voice loud and aggressive. "You think you can just walk away? After everything I've done for you?" Isabel crossed her arms, her posture defensive but firm. "I'm done, Nathan. You've made that decision for me." Nathan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think you're better off without me? You're nothing without me." "That's enough," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Nathan turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Ethan. "You again," he sneered, "the self-righteous security guard, always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Ethan stepped forward, his expression calm but unyielding. "Walk away, Nathan. This isn't the place." Nathan laughed bitterly. "And who's going to make me?" "I will if I have to," Ethan said, his voice steady. For a moment it seemed like Nathan might push further, but something in Ethan's gaze made him falter. He muttered something under his breath before storming out of the lobby, leaving Isabel standing alone. Isabel turned to Ethan, her expression a mix of gratitude and regret. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan nodded, his voice measured. "You don't have to thank me." She hesitated, then added, "Ethan, I meant what I said last night. I didn't deserve you, and I didn't appreciate what we had. But seeing you now, I realize how much I took for granted." Ethan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "It's in the past, Isabel. We can't change it." "I know," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Finally, Isabel turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the sunlight streaming through the revolving doors. As the lobby quieted once more, Amelia stepped beside Ethan, her expression thoughtful. "Well, that was something." Ethan exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like hours. "It was." Amelia studied him, a small smile tugging at her lips. So, what now? Ethan looked at her, something shifting in his gaze. I don't know, but maybe it's time to stop hiding. Amelia's smile widened and she held out her hand. Then let's start with this, a new beginning. Ethan hesitated, then took her hand, the gesture small but significant. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past beginning to lift, replaced by the quiet hope of what might lie ahead. As the sunlight filled the lobby, Ethan Carter took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. Life has a way of testing us in ways we never expect. Ethan's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there's a chance for redemption, growth, and a new beginning. His resilience and quiet determination not only reshaped his life, but also inspired those around him to look beyond appearances and see the strength within. If this story moved you or made you reflect on the power of second chances, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories like this waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.